It's really an honor to be included in this event about arts and culture and politics, and I wonder if you're wondering what Code for America is doing here, or maybe what we are. Are we patriotic coders? We are patriotic coders, in fact. But what you might not know is actually our coders work on our social safety net. So in fact, what they're doing most of the time is working with those issues that you see very visibly in our community, like homelessness, but they're doing it associated with this shiny thing called Silicon Valley and Silicon Valley practices and approaches. And one of the things I'd like to talk about today a little bit is, Silicon Valley has a narrative that's very much associated with the problem, not the solution. There's been an enormous amount of wealth created by the people who are garnered by the people who have created these technology platforms, and they've caused huge inequalities in our society. So you have enormous wealth while you have people sleeping on the streets here in San Francisco. You cannot miss this. And we have Silicon Valley entrepreneurs who do things like write blog posts about their outrage at people sleeping on the streets in their own city. And they don't do Silicon Valley any favors when they talk that way, because it helps us really understand Silicon Valley as part of the problem. And of course, they're right to some degree. So one of the things I'm asking is, what does Silicon Valley, or what my boss used to call metaphysical Silicon Valley, have to offer the solution to these problems? So a lot of people will say, technology, that's what Silicon Valley brings. Now, what if you bring technology to the problems of government programs? So there's about $500 billion of taxpayer money that goes to the social safety net, and if we want to bring technology to that, what might it look like? About 8 years ago, California counties here decided that we should bring technology to a particular problem. So food stamps. In our state, it's called CalFresh. Nationally, it's called SNAP. It's a $70 billion program. But California has one of the lowest rates of adoptions of this program in the country. I think only worse than us is Wyoming, which is a pretty small state. So they said, let's start to fix this problem by allowing people to apply online instead of having to go into the office. And so they made a website, and this is what it looks like. It's sped up very fast. If I were to walk you through it, we would be here all day. It does not work on a mobile phone at all. It asks over 200 questions. A lot of those questions are confusing, but many of them are very insulting. And so at Code for America, we thought we could do a better job of that. We made a very simple, easy-to-use application that works on a mobile phone, on a smartphone. Ask just a couple of questions. You actually don't need to answer all those questions. And we thought, great, we will have solved this problem. And we did. We got a lot more people to apply for food stamps. But we also decided to ask them what happened afterwards and see if they actually got food stamps. And I'm talking about eligible people here. Some people apply, of course, who aren't eligible. So we text messaged them, lots of them, and asked them what happened. And what we found is that for example, in one county, about 25% of people who applied got the letter telling them when their interview is, and their interview is a required step in the process. After the date of their interview, a lot of people got them in a language that they did not understand. And everybody who goes into this, and many of you probably know this because about half of people Americans are on food stamps at some point in their lives. I'm sure I'm telling many of you things you don't know. But everybody gets letters like this, which I would also read to you if we have more time, and you would throw rotten tomatoes at me because these letters are written in legalese that nobody really understands, so you don't know that you're supposed to provide more documentation. You ignore the letter and you don't get the benefit. So technology wasn't really the problem, and technology wasn't really the solution in either case. What we did actually, though, is that collecting the data about those problems that people encounter, following what we call users, otherwise known as people, through the process, actually does help, because you can tell the California counties what they're doing wrong, and they can make their programs work a little bit better every day by solving those problems like the letters. There is no silver bullet. I'm talking about just a little bit better every day based on feedback from the people in their community. So I would offer that it is not technology that we bring, or that Silicon Valley brings to this problem. It is simply a focus on users, otherwise known as people. And this, for example, is the window in the government digital service in the UK, who does sort of the best job of websites for people who are accessing government services in the world. They put up a big piece of butcher paper and they ripped a hole out of it, and they say, and when you walk by the window and you look down, they say, that's who we're working for. And that's why they do such a great job, because they're meeting what we know as user needs, not government needs. So the problem isn't too much, not enough technology, not enough money. In fact, there's actually quite a bit of that. That website cost us $800 million, for instance. It's that the tech and the money is spent on these government needs instead of user needs. And the consequences of this aren't just annoying, they're devastating. They're devastating for people who work in government. Remember that. They are not the problem. The system is the problem. But they are devastating to the people the government is supposed to serve. So you've probably been frustrated standing in line at the DMV. Take all that frustration that you've felt and imagine that what you're doing is trying to keep custody of your child. Imagine that what's at stake is your own incarceration, because you got a ticket for running a stop sign, and then you had to choose between standing in line all day, which is not uncommon. This is in Atlanta, where people literally stand in line for at least 6 hours to clear a basic traffic ticket. And if you don't, if you have to choose between standing in line and going to your job, you will probably choose your job, and you will end up with a bench warrant for your arrest. Again, those are not that uncommon. Probably plenty of people in the room have had them. But imagine a community that had 1.5 bench warrants per capita. There is a community that had that statistic in 2013, and you might be able to guess what it was called. It's Ferguson, Missouri. So the consequences of this are also devastating to our democracy. We have finally realized that if you can't make a website that works, you can't govern. And of course, this is all changing. This is all getting rapidly better. I want you to know that. But another slightly depressing example. In 2014, California voters passed something called Prop 47. I hope many of you have heard of it. It allows low-level convictions. These are usually very old minor drug crimes to be cleared from your record. But the problem is that in LA, for example, where there are 690,000 people eligible, only about 50,000 people have even started the process. So you're talking about 7% of people taking advantage of this expungement remedy, even though it will allow them to access jobs, to access housing or student loans, and they are prevented from doing that until they can expunge their records. So did we make a mistake? Did voters pass this thinking that people cared and just nobody cares? No, what happened is that, and I'm sorry my slides have gone ahead without me, is that it's a 10-step process to clear your record. You have to go find the right forms. You have to find you have to apply in different counties, and it will just make you want to throw these things up in the air. And reading a rap sheet, for instance, which is part of the process, you have to get your rap sheet, is harder to do than reading computer code, in my opinion. So the people spoke. We voted and decided to pass this law, and yet it's not happening. And this is very, very common. Through no political wrongdoing, we don't respect the will of the people because the people are involved in the idea, but they're not involved in the execution of the idea. And this is, again, what I mean about Silicon Valley practices being part of the solution. Take Facebook. You may love Facebook, you may hate Facebook, but consider how it was built. It wasn't built in one fell swoop according to a bunch of policies and regulations. I'm going to presume, I don't know, I saw the movie, that Zuck and his friends tried something and then let people play with it, and then they got a little bit better and a little bit different because people were using it and he and his team reacted to how it was being used. And imagine if the process to apply for food stamps or expunge your record were built in that way, then we would actually respect the will of the people and use the $470 billion in our social safety net in the means of the will of the people. So I'll just finish by saying, as we all know, it's election season, and I think a lot of us are confused. There's so much going on in this election that you can't account for. This disconnect around voting, too many people not voting, we want to solve it oftentimes by making it easier to vote. But I think one of the things we have to do is solve it by showing people that when they vote on something and they express the will of the people, that we can actually do that we can execute that will. We have to show that it's not just about the politics, and we talked about politics earlier today, we probably talked about it all day, but it's all, or the policies, but it's at the implementation. So when we talk about we the people, we've got to understand that it doesn't stop after you vote, that we the people have to be involved in making those things work. Thank you very much.